the newsagents.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. People who worked hard to serve their communities had their lives and their reputations destroyed through absolutely no fault of their own. The victims must get justice and compensation. Sir Win Williams' inquiry is undertaking crucial work to expose what went wrong, and we've paid almost £150 million in compensation to over 2,500 victims. But today I can announce that we will introduce new primary legislation to make sure that those convicted as a result of the Horizon scandal are swiftly exonerated and compensated.
And a resounding hear, hear from everyone in the Commons for that announcement from Rishi Sunak. And the Minister would later go on to say that these are exceptional measures, but these are exceptional circumstances. Except what was impossible 2 months ago, 6 months ago, 5 years ago, is suddenly possible today, even though no material fact has changed.
That Minister, Kevin Hollingray, was in the House of Commons just moments ago, saying that before their announcement, only 5 people had received full and final settlements. 5 people out of almost 800. So what is this magical boost that has just allowed the government to get on with it? Welcome to the newsagents.
It's John.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And thankfully, mercifully, at long bloody last, all these people who faced convictions as a result of the Horizon IT scandal are now going to have their sentences, their fines, all the rest of it exonerated by primary legislation that will go through the House of Commons, presumably at the sort of warp speed that was not available for the past 10 years. But suddenly the government has found on the dashboard a warp speed button, which is really convenient when you're under a huge amount of pressure. But that is what is going to happen now, and the promise that full compensation to everyone will finally be paid.
Sort of. And I think there is quite a lot that lands in that area of full compensation, because what we heard today was, yes, there will be an en masse overturning of the convictions, but there will only be, in the first instance, a minimum payout of £75,000. And the Minister in charge, Kevin Hollingray, has made clear that that saves each of them having to go through a full process. But it will also put off, I imagine, a lot of people from coming further. So I was just listening to Jo Hamilton, who ran the post office in Hampshire, who was portrayed so memorably in that ITV drama. And she says £75,000 doesn't even cover the interest on the debt that they are now owing. And so if you put that into the grand scheme of things, which is their livelihoods, their jobs, their houses, all the relationships as well, which are unquantifiable, then this idea of 75,000, yes, it might lead to more money, and they're looking for payouts of more like 700,000, 600, 700,000, but each of them have to then go through another process, start a whole other process. And actually, if there's one thing we've learnt about this, it's they did extraordinarily well as a body. But individually, many of them are terrified of coming forward. They don't trust the institutions anymore. They definitely don't trust the courts. They don't trust the people that are in charge of giving them their money. And my guess is that the government is quietly hoping a lot of them will take the 75,000 and say, I'm just not going back there.
Well, I mean, why would you? Why would you trust them? I mean, Sunak's word today was that the primary legislation, which the government is going to bring forward, is going to result in swift exoneration, swift compensation. There has been nothing swift about this process. I mean, we talked a little bit yesterday about the fact that, you know, one way or another, this has been stretching back for some people for 2 decades. So the legislation might be swift, and it might hopefully, although I doubt that it will, yield swift results. But for the individuals concerned, it's been nowhere near. And what was interesting today was the fact that Sunak felt that the first PMQs of the year, that he had to come forward and say this. And not just say we're looking into it, not that just we've announced a review, which has basically been the government's position hitherto, but that there was going to be primary legislation. And that meant actually, in terms of him and his getting out of the Commons situation that he was in, it knocked it stone dead. Starmer didn't ask any more questions about it because what was the point?
Yeah, I mean, that clip that we played in the introduction there, those were Rishi Sunak's first words at Prime Minister's questions. And it was kind of, you know, set up for him. And it was so clear that, right, I don't want to row over this. I want to get this out there straight away. You know, we're on the front foot on this, when of course they have been dragging their feet for absolutely years and years and years on it. And I just would love to know if a meeting is taking place between the general counsel at the post office and the CEO to say, OK, we've got to call off the dogs. We've got to call off all those army of lawyers who've been saying we're going to appeal this and you can't do that. And just say to everybody, OK, we're holding up our hands now. We're waving a white flag over the headquarters of the post office, and everybody, you can have your money. Because at the moment, until now, right up until now, post office lawyers have been acting in defence of the institution and trying to fight off the claims of individuals who want recompense.
And you say you can have your money, but actually, how much money is that? And does the government have it? And whose money is it? I mean, obviously it comes back to the taxpayer, but we're talking several billion from the sound of it, right? And at the moment, all the postmasters are being made to do is sign a statement to the effect that they did not commit the crimes of which they're accused, right? So they all get to sign the statement and then the convictions go, including, I think, the ones that have already been fought in the Court of Appeal. But the question is what happens after that? Because this 75,000 is meant to happen in 40 days, right? But the lawyers that you're talking about that have been protecting the post office are still wrangling at the moment over £100 here, a little bit more there. Oh, we haven't seen the statement that says, you know, you paid that. And, you know, going back to Jo Hamilton, she was just talking about the fact that her husband's been diagnosed with cancer. They just want the money to pay for treatment. She said, we want the money before we die. I mean, you can't actually get your head round this idea that they have been fighting as a body, right, for 6 or 7 years. They've been fighting the system for 20 years, and they are 20 years older than they were when they first started this. I mean, that's the thing that sort of, you know, that puts it all into context. And I guess the question is, what a lovely start to the new year. You know, we're all thinking, right? Because we haven't been living with the scandal in the same way that the victims have. What a lovely start to the new year. What was it? You know, what was it that stopped them from doing this in December? And I guess the question is, nobody was asking the questions in the same way, at the same pace, with the same sense of injustice as we all are now.
Well, as Lewis said, you know, if you are those people, let's not be naive about this. One of the government tactics is to neutralise this as an issue and take it out of the headlines. Now, maybe the government will be absolutely true to its word. There will be full compensation, the money that you kind of listed there, Emily, about how they are going to have to, the steps they have to go through. You know, maybe they will hurry that through. I would imagine at the moment, though, the people who've been affected and affected for so long about this are going to be deeply suspicious
Completely.
of everything the government is saying, and when it slips out the headlines, maybe then civil servants, the functionaries, will be kind of finding new reasons to raise, well, there's a question mark we've got over this, and I don't think we can do that quite as quickly, Minister, and it all suddenly starts to slow down again.
And Emily, you talk about like trust and trust in the system and people concerned continuing to have trust. I mean, Horizon is still being used in post offices now. It's due to continue to be used until probably 2025, 2026 at the very earliest. Fujitsu, which is the company which is responsible for the system, never mind the post office, they continue to be embedded across the Whitehall machine in all sorts of different ways.
£5 billion worth of contracts.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, in 2019, the Court of Appeal found Fujitsu's Horizon system had contained errors after a decades-long campaign by the postmasters to reveal this. I mean, this is the point. Like, we knew that in 2019. Since that time, Fujitsu has received 1.6 billion in individual government contracts and was involved in a further 3.3 billion, that's the 5 billion you're referring to, Emily, in joint awards from departments including the Treasury, which, by the way, Rishi Sunak was in charge of for some time, HMRC, and so on. So, you know, this is the thing. People sometimes ask, well, why do these things take a long time to work through the system, which is something I think we're going to talk about or come to public attention. Like, Fujitsu is one of those companies, like so many government companies or sort of companies that governments use to sort of deliver systems and regulate systems. It's just embedded in the warp and weft of the way Whitehall operates. So you want accountability? Fine. But you're going to start unpicking those threads and loads of the tapestry is going to come undone.
I tell you what, if I was the CEO of Fujitsu, I would be giving a massive pay rise to the head of government affairs for the organisation and for the head of PR because, oh my God, have they kept Fujitsu out of the headlines? I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about Fujitsu. I can't remember an interview with anyone from the company. I couldn't name a single person involved in the company. They have managed to somehow kind of steer clear of all of this, and that they're nowhere to be seen in terms of coming before the public and explaining. You know, when Boeing's plane has a door blowout, Boeing has to come to the wicket and explain what has happened and what they're going to do about it. You know, it's hard to think of
is slightly harder to hide, particularly if it turns
this
up in
is
some
a
poor
scam.
teacher's back garden.
I
That's my
know.
point. You know, you see a door fall off a plane. The cleverest thing about this was the deniability that allowed them to keep pretending that they didn't know what was going on when clearly they knew something was afoot.
And also our system, and we're part of this, is used to and likes to look for political accountability above all else, right? And we even heard that in the Commons today with a certain... Who was the first person to ask the first parliamentary question to the Prime Minister of the year? It is the one and only
Anderson.
50p Lee or 20p Lee or whatever it was.
30, I think,
30.
wasn't it?
Okay, I'm doing
You're
him.
doing him
I'm
down.
doing him down. Actually, yeah,
He's
exactly.
worth double
50p.
that, Lewis.
50p. I mean, honestly, you can eat for a fortune.
Rishi Sunak has halved inflation, so he is 25.
Yeah, 25p Lee, 15p Lee, half a shilling Lee, because he probably prefers pre-decimal currency. But Lee Anderson was the first deputy chairman of the Tory party, was the first MP to ask a question to the Prime Minister this parliamentary year, and this is what he said.
The Horizon Post Office scandal saw hundreds of innocent people sent to prison, people like a former constituent of mine who went to jail for 3 years. Now, during this scandal, the leader of the Liberal Democrats was the minister in charge of the Post Office. In charge of the Post Office. This is the same Liberal Democrat leader who in the past has called for the resignation of over 30 prominent people in this country who have made mistakes in their job. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that the leader of the Lib Dem should take his own advice and start by clearing his desk, clear his diary and clear off?
Yeah.
Clear off.
Clear off.
Clear
Clear off. Rishi Sunak absolutely didn't engage with that naked political attack on Sir Ed Davey. He was trying to sound statesmanlike. We're going to hear now from Stephen Flynn, the SNP MP, who also wanted to make a political point. And there is a slight difference in Rishi Sunak's response to him.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think the Prime Minister quite gets it. This isn't just a plague on all their houses. This is a plague on this House itself, because injustice goes far beyond just the sub-postmasters. The reality is that when the public come knocking on the doors of this here chamber seeking justice, the government only ever answers when they have no options left. Now, the Leader of the Opposition said last week that the public are right to be angry at Westminster, and they are angry at Westminster. They're angry at Westminster because they know that this place never really changes. Does it, Prime Minister?
No, Mr. Speaker. This is, and actually, I am sad that the honourable gentleman is trying to politicise something that has happened over multiple decades, with multiple people at fault. But the key thing is, after the 2019 High Court case, the government did act to establish an independent inquiry, independent compensation schemes, and as I said, has paid out compensation to 2,500 people. But rather than trying to politicise it, what we should be doing is focusing on the people affected and making sure that they get the answers, justice and compensation that they deserve, and that is what we are delivering.
Yeah, so Sunak berates Stephen Flynn from the SNP for trying to make such an important issue political, but didn't have anything to say about Lee Anderson doing exactly the same thing when he is the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party, and Rishi Sunak would have known exactly what Lee Anderson was going to say. It's the conjuring trick. The separation between party and government.
But it's also pure politics. I mean,
Yeah,
answer
exactly.
like being like, oh, you're making this political. This is pure politics. Nothing could possibly be more political than this scandal. It's what politics is. You've basically got injustice. Politics is partly about, at the very least, injustice. And there are political players who are at least partly responsible.
I think that also explains why it has been such a slow burn issue, because if you want to visualise this, it's more like a sort of flow chart where everyone can blame the person sort of behind them, as it were. So you have this oval and a series of arrows. It isn't like it appeals to one constituency. When you hear Keir Starmer berate the government for, whatever they've got wrong on immigration or whatever they've got wrong in the economy, or Liz Truss's handling of, tax cuts, it's a very easy place to find your constituency. And I think the difficulty really in the sort of public eye is there hasn't been one government, one party, one area that has been solely to blame. Lee Anderson, you heard in that clip, sounds more irked at the idea that Ed Davey had called for other people to resign than he was upset at the injustices done to, the 800 or so men and women that were involved as victims in this scandal. And I think that has sort of explained to me a little bit why there hasn't been a sort of focal point of the anger, because it hasn't appealed just to one side or another.
Look, it's about the complexity of society and the way government organises itself now, where it is not just one minister who can be held responsible for a decision, when you've got so many organisations that are sort of part of government, but not really part of government. Kind of years ago when I was doing politics at university, it was quasi-autonomous, non-governmental organisations, quangos. Yeah, except I couldn't. And now you've got even more arm's length body, executive bodies who've got their own autonomy to do what they like, as the Post Office was able to do. And finding out where the hell you go for accountability has been more or less impossible. And we're going to talk about why suddenly now there is going to be accountability. That's coming up.
So one of the things that I've seen quite a lot of people ask me, I don't know about the two of you, on Twitter and elsewhere, is why this story is happening now. And because obviously the facts have been known for a long time. And we often say on this show, right, we want to sort of pull back the curtain on kind of how the media works and how news works. And I do think this is actually a really interesting example of that, because it's a really good example of something that we see time and time again, which is that stories can kind of bubble away, and even not bubble that much, but just sort of be present and never really catch fire. And often, and indeed we've seen it in this scandal, journalists are kind of blamed for that. I'm sure you both would have seen lots of people saying, where were the journalists? Why did it take an ITV drama? And actually, I think the truth is actually so much more complicated and complex than that. And why this has actually ignited over the past few days is the obvious answer is yes, it's the ITV drama, but there's so much more at work about how the news works. I mean, for example, we were talking just now before we came in, sort of thinking about this. One of the answers is that at the moment, the brutal truth is there's not much else in terms of news. And if this story had happened, if the drama had aired, the ITV drama had aired on, I don't know, October the 6th maybe, 2023, just before the October 7th attacks, would we be in the place that we're now in? And the answer is probably not. And that is, in a way, a bit disturbing, right? But it just shows this kind of contingency of news and politics sometimes.
Look, I spent a third of my career as a foreign correspondent. And what you learnt was that there is a lighthouse beam. And that beam is continually going around the world.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's on you. When I was in the US and it was Donald Trump as president, it was pretty much on you the whole time. But there'll be other times where the beam goes somewhere else. Israel, the Middle East. There's no point ringing up the editor and saying, put me on the news tonight, because the story would have to be so colossal. And this landed just at a time after Christmas, New Year, when kind of people are still at home watching TV and maybe not at work and have got more downtime.
Great moment in the schedules.
Great moment in the schedules. There is no big competing news story that is taking it off the air. I'm sure people will say to me, but come on, Gaza has been huge. But it was a domestic story and it got attention. And that's the way we work. That sometimes stories go out of the headlines. We're on day 3 of this story and none of the basic facts have changed.
I also think, without getting too Macmillan, that going back to Stephen Flynn's sort of enumeration of disasters, many of them were focused around events. Hillsborough was an event. It was appalling. It's actually sort of sawn into my memory as a Sheffield girl. I remember the day. I remember where I was. It has never left me as a kind of moment. Grenfell the same. I can still sort of, see the building, see the flames at the top. We covered it on Newsnight. We were standing there. I think the ITV drama became that event in the absence of one thing that was sort of visual or that was memorable. And I think that was also the problem with the post office scandal, maybe like the blood scandal, that the stories and the testimonies were emerging to build a picture in a jigsaw way, but it didn't focus round one day, one moment, one catastrophic emergency in the way that, you know, some of the others did. And I think ITV almost filled that gap and said, right, this is your viewing, this is the event, now you get it.
I think that's totally true. And one of the things that people have been saying in the last few days is, well, where were the journalists? And of course, the answer is that you don't get the ITV drama without the journalists, because it's the journalists who have actually done all the hard yards, great stuff in Computer Weekly or Private Eye. But by definition, lots of people are not reading Computer Weekly or Private Eye or all of the journalism which has happened since. But I think there's also something else, right, is that even when there's an event, so you just mentioned Grenfell, Emily, which I think obviously captured our attention. In some ways, it continues to do so. It was a story which was in some ways made for television news, and it consumed all before it. But then, of course, the bandwagon does move on, right? And although, yes, there were stories about the individual people concerned and the heartbreaking stories and the death and so on, when I think of something like the cladding scandal, with which Grenfell was obviously intimately connected, and then the wider building safety scandal, and something that I did a lot of work on Newsnight. We did a whole load of stuff on it when we were on Newsnight. Actually getting people to sustain their attention on these quite complicated, often quite dense policy stories, which often involve institutions and political organisations.
I mean, cladding is not a sexy word.
No,
right?
and building safety scandal. We spent ages, I remember, doing all these stories week after week on building safety, which affects millions of people. People listening to this right now will be stuck in leases and flats that are basically worthless. And very similar to the post office scandal, they've done nothing wrong. They bought something in good faith, and they've basically ended up in a terrible position. But it's hard to actually sustain and get people's attention on these stories that can be page 8 in the newspaper terms, page 8 or page 9 stories, and that rarely really just take up all of the public sphere or public attention.
Yeah, I kind of look back as, having worked in TV, and you're so right, Emily, about the image that you've got to have. You've got to have good pictures, and that's why a story like Cambridge Analytica, for example, was a really difficult story to tell.
Yeah.
Because what is the picture? Yeah. What is the picture that symbolises Cambridge data? Yeah. And you've kind of you've got computers and little kind of binary numbers flashing up and down on a screen, but it's not picture friendly, and therefore for us it's a much harder story to tell. But with the post office one, and this is what I do find puzzling, is that you would have thought for the Telegraph or for the Mail or for the Express that the sub postmistress who has been hauled over the coals by an unfeeling, brutal organisation is fined and all the rest of it. It's a great human story to tell the accounts of people whose lives
I wonder if it was
have
actually
been
too
upended.
big. I wonder whether it
possibly.
had been, if it was like, we talk about the sort of the small numbers in a miscarriage of justice. The Birmingham, was it 4?
Birmingham 6.
The
Guildford
Birmingham 6
4,
and the
Birmingham-
Guildford 4. We can handle a small number of people. I wonder whether you're getting to 800. I mean, it's almost too unwieldy. You can't get your head around it. You cannot contemplate it.
I also think it's just about, again, it's a story which is fundamentally about accounting, and getting people to set up right a story, even when it's really about injustice, is hard. I also think there's another thing.
But that's the thing, it isn't really about accounting.
Well, yeah, but I mean, like, the genesis of it is is in people. You're explaining to people there's this IT system, and it's delivering or yielding mistakes, which are, there's just like lots of points of logic to it, or points of reference to it, right? But I think there's another element as well, which I do think is partly about the way journalism has gone and the way politics has gone, right? Which is that, look, what are the stories which have generated and caught all of our attention so much over the last few years, or the last 10 years or so, right? We have increasingly moved, both the press, the print press, but also the rest of us as well. We have moved to stories around that are highly charged, around the culture wars, around populism, around big kind of political stories which have sort of shaped our lives, and then stories like this which are really, really important, but somehow kind of less sexy and less dramatic. They've not been able to find an obvious bit of oxygen or an obvious audience.
But news is, by definition, the new. Right?
Yeah.
So once you know the facts, I mean, I'm sure people will come to us and say, well, why didn't you talk about it? We talk in the industry about a peg, right?
Yeah.
And a peg literally means, I'm not telling you.
No.
But what's the peg for that is the question that we're all asking, which is, what does this hang on? What is the new piece of information that allows you to kick off your day's discussion or your news or your bulletin or your programme with that today? And I guess the truth is that the journalists did do their job, right? The paper editors did do their jobs. They did run the stories. They did put it prominently in their papers. But until you have new news, then you're not going to lead with it.
And also, you're not going to lead with it if you think that the outside world is not that interested. I mean, you know, there is an element to which any editor will take a gamble and say, I think this is so important, screw whether this is sexy for the audience or not. We've got to be seen to be doing this. We've got to do it because we think it is an important subject, even though it might cause us some trouble.
And sometimes that does pay off, right?
Yeah, of course it does.
Sometimes you see somebody who's taken a real stance on something and it has caught fire.
I mean, the thing that, again, pulling the curtain back,
There's no curtain left anymore.
The curtain is shredded. The three of us have worked in TV for most of our careers, where you get the most inaccurate figures about the number of people listening to your or watching your output, because it's an extrapolation based on 1,000 people around the country who've got set-top boxes. Now that we are doing a podcast, we get absolutely precise data on who listens to an episode and where they are.
We know your names. We know where you live.
So if you're listening in Mali, we are grateful to you.
Thank
and
you.
Rwanda, thank you very much indeed.
Half of our listeners will be in Rwanda shortly.
That's just the Home Secretary.
That's conjecture, not yet.
Yeah.
But I think that we can see that there are some subjects we do and we think, oh God, audience wasn't great for that, was it?
But we do it anyway.
But we try to do it anyway. But you've got to accept that you are cognizant of what works for the audience. And clearly, the newspapers, yes, they did it. The broadcasters, yes, we did it, have done the post office scandal, but something changed in the last week.
And that, to go back to where we started on the show today, I mean, that is the thing that Kevin Hollerate, the Post Office Minister, when he was asked on the Today programme this morning, you literally wrote a letter in November to the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, ruling out primary legislation because of all of the potential negative consequences that could have in terms of the effect on judicial independence and the fact that some people might get away with fraud as a result. And you ruled it out in November. And yet here we are in January, and it is not only not being ruled out, but it's very much being ruled in. It's what the government's going to do. And nothing else has changed apart from this sudden attention to it. And I can understand if, you're not in the media, you might find that a bit puzzling and disturbing, if nothing else.
For me, it actually reminds me of when you're a kid, you think that things can change very easily. If there is the will, you just think that things can change. And you have adults explaining to you that no, that can't, because obviously that takes a process, and no, you can't have a trial unless you have to wait a year and a half. And as a kid, you don't really understand why everything takes so. I think I was very impatient as a kid. Still am.
No way.
Yeah, amazingly.
I can't believe that.
But I sort of think that actually what Hollingwake has just proved, or what the government's just proved, is that everyone who says, I don't understand why that can't happen next week, is probably right.
Yes.
Right?
The
Things can, actually.
The Overton window of the idea of what's possible in politics and what isn't actually can shift extremely quickly. And it is hard to explain. Maybe that's because of COVID
as well.
Yes,
we shut down a country.
Yes.
We found a vaccination. We didn't go through the whole 1 million different tests to get where we needed to get to, because there was an urgency that actually took the systems out of it. Now, that's not a great way to operate in a democracy, day by day. But I guess it just shows you can if you want to.
But to go back to your point, John, about the idea of the light that's constantly moving, there's another way of looking at it, right, which is media, a bit like politics, and in our country in particular, they really often fuse in lots of ways. It is like a herd. And
totally.
And sometimes, and this can be really frustrating, and I can understand this, particularly if you're a journalist working on a story, trying to say, come and look at this, honestly, this is an amazing story. There is just sometimes a kind of, the herd is somewhere else. Yeah. And sometimes, eventually, as has been proven with this story, the herd will get to you. Sometimes it never does. And that can be deeply, deeply frustrating. But it basically comes down to the fact that journalists and politicians and all the people who kind of dictate the conversation or move the light or dictate where the herd is going are human beings. And human beings are often illogical, irrational, and you're basically dealing with human psychology as much as you are sort of truth and fact and the idea that there is a subjectively a story which deserves attention. It can just be quite contingent and random.
I also think that journalists and politicians, particularly I think in this country, but maybe I'm being naive, are very embedded with each other.
Yes,
I mean,
totally.
Take out the fact that most of our politicians were journalists, and several have then gone back into journalism from prime minister positions or whatever it is. But I also think that it's a symbiotic relationship where journalists take stuff from politicians because it serves both of them, and that's how stories are generated.
But I'm going to end, before we go to the break, by raising the tone, by quoting Voltaire, because I always like to quote Voltaire on this.
Where are we going here?
Where are we going here?
You remind me of Voltaire in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's about justice. And Voltaire said in 1748, the great principle that it is better to run the risk of sparing the guilty than to condemn the innocent. And the government has finally alighted on that position.
Franklin, same thing. 9 men go free than 1 hang.
Have you been sitting on WikiQuote this whole time?
Or
honestly?
Blackstone, the jurist, wrote, the law holds that it's better that 10 guilty persons escape than 1 innocent suffer.
Sorry, I may have got the number wrong. And funnily enough, this is exactly what Kevin Hollingray is saying today.
I've never heard Voltaire.
Voltaire and Kevin Hollingray.
Look, this is like rich.
And Kevin Hollingray named in the same sentence.
But he's just said that. He said we might be, in overturning convictions, we might very well be letting a few get through the net. And quite frankly, at this point, we're just going to go,
Not for the first time. Voltaire guiding government policy, as it should be.
What happens when you mislay your defence secretary? Because that seems to...
Is that a euphemism?
No, it's what's happened in the United States of America, where Lloyd Austin, who is holding an absolutely pivotal role, given what is happening in Ukraine, given what is happening in the Middle East, and with kind of multiple fronts seeming to be opening up on that, with the Houthis, with Lebanon, Gaza, West Bank, etc. He just disappeared. And no one knew where he was. The president didn't know where he was. The national security advisor didn't know where he was.
It's not ideal, is it?
It's not ideal. It's suboptimal, I think we would say.
Yeah.
It turns out he had been admitted to hospital, didn't tell the president, has had quite a major operation because of prostate cancer. And of course it's led to calls that he ought to be fired because you're leaving the ship without the captain on board.
We've all done it, John. We've all just disappeared without telling our boss where we're going for a couple
of
days.
The most extraordinary thing, really, is Biden's response to this. I mean, he's confirmed, or his staff have confirmed today, that he only found out about this on Friday. And yet, I mean, we always talk about Biden as being, whatever you think of him politically, as being a deeply sort of human, personable leader, you know, a man who suffered clearly the death of his first wife and his baby daughter, and more recently his grown-up son as well. And actually Biden's sort of take on this has been like, yeah, well, OK, it's fine. I'm not going to sack you. We'll order a review, but, you know, come on back and hope you're OK.
I mean, look, it shows the humanity of Biden, but it is a pretty extraordinary position that, you know, given that he is the leader of the world's most powerful armed forces at a time of critical global insecurity. The idea that you just disappear off the radar screen.
Imagine, right, what we would have done if our former Defence Secretary, Sir Gavin Williamson, had gone missing. I mean, the country would have
it's not
fallen apart.
Analogous, I don't think.
I don't
Sir
know.
Gavin.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
know
world,
what?
the world,
Sir Gavin had left
the world
the stage.
holds its breath tonight with news that Sir Gavin Williamson may have disappeared.
Why is Brian Blessed doing the news? I think the country would have paid for Gavin to take a few days off, but it's all right. He's helping out Somaliland now, so...
oh, thank goodness for that.
Indeed so, yeah.
We'll be back tomorrow. See you then. Bye-bye.
See you then.
Bye-bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.